Welcome to the Inequality Conversation series. We are very happy that Professor Gopal Naik has agreed to deliver the sixth lecture in the series that we are continuing. Professor Gopal Naik is going to talk about inequality, some observations from rural India. Thanks a lot, Professor Naik, for agreeing to deliver this lecture. It's all yours. What we'll do is once the presentation is over, then we will take questions. Viewers, if you have any questions and if you're watching this on YouTube, please send the questions to cpp@iimb.ac.in. Those who are on Zoom can put their questions in chat, or if you want to ask questions, put your hand up and the moderators will allow you to ask the questions. Professor Naik, all yours. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Sriram. I'm very happy to be part of this inequality conversations. Let me just try to share my presentation for today. So the topic I'm going to talk about is inequality observations from rural India. This is based on several sort of experiments that we have done in rural India, and what are some key observations that we have made in terms of development in rural areas, and therefore how it actually contributes to inequality. This inequality conversation has started with the World Inequality Report, which basically says that around 1990, top 10% had only 31% of the total income, and bottom 50% of the population had a share of 22% in the total income. Whereas now, top 10% actually has 57% of the total income, and top 1% actually has as much as 22% of the total national income. And the share of the bottom 50% population has gone down from 22 to 13%. So that is the concern, and therefore also needs to be examined, and also try to find ways by which this inequality could be reduced. There are other reports which actually talk about inequality, and let's say, for example, Balasubramanian Kumar and Longani talk about inequality in India using the consumption data, so which also reveals significant inequality between the first decile to 10th decile, particularly if you separate the rural and urban population, and if you look at the percentage of annual growth of consumption. So we can see that the first decile of rural population has much lower annual growth in consumption, whereas if you see the last deciles of the urban population, we see a very high growth in the annual consumption. So which is also a sort of reflection of income. And going forward, if this continues, we will see that a lot more inequality would arise. So of course they also talk about sustaining India's growth trajectory would require increased attention on inequality. So there are other studies which have talked about the disparity in the rural and urban standard of living. For example, Shergill in the paper published in EPW in 2021 computes composite score of a rural-urban disparity of standard of living, which indicates that the rural standard of living is lower than the urban standard of living by about 50%. So that's a significant difference that we see between the rural and urban standard of living. While it varies from state to state, states like Punjab and Kerala, we may not see much of disparity, but definitely in the eastern part, we do see significant disparity in the standard of living. So that is something, we could possibly see this disparity in many other parts of the world. This study by Burgung, Non, and Bosello, of course, there's slightly older data, in 2013 data, which gives the average monthly income of agriculture and non-agriculture population, and also looks at the poverty among the agriculture people who are engaged in agriculture and non-agriculture. And the estimate is that about 75% of the poor people are associated with agriculture. So that's a concern. And if this is actually the distribution of income of global agriculture population and non-agriculture population, slightly older data, but it's unlikely that it has gone away. So if we look at the India's population and the share of rural area in the total population, in 2020, it is about 65%. So it has decreased from 69% in 2010. In terms of share, though it is increasing, rural population is still increasing. In 2020, the growth rate from 2019 was 0.29%. So if we look at, again, the agriculture population within the rural area, it's about 70%. And therefore, by 2020, about 45% of the population, total population, was agriculture. And if you compare that with the share of agriculture in the GDP, we see that there is the inequality is actually arising out of this disparity between the share of agriculture in GDP, which is actually, of course, so though thanks to COVID, it has slightly improved from 2019, but it's about 16-17%. So essentially saying that about 46% of the population is sharing about 17% of the income, whereas 55% or 54% of the population is actually having about 82% of the GDP. So that is gives considerable disparity between agriculture and non-agriculture population. If we look at the growth rate in GDP and agriculture, we again see that while agriculture growth rate has been sort of varying a lot, and in most of the years it's much less than the GDP growth rate. As we know, service sector grows much faster, and agriculture, growth is lower than especially the service sector. Therefore, going forward, having larger population in service sector, we would expect that this share of GDP or sort of per capita income in agriculture population is likely to decrease. So then, what are the challenges of Indian agriculture sector, and whether, how do we take care of it? So there are, I'm just, pointing out some major issues. One is the resource use. So Indian agriculture is labor intensive. Land titles records are very poor. Again, land degradation is quite high. It's about 20% of the land is degraded according to some estimates. And also water use, though water is scarce, water use is not proper. In fact, water use efficiency is considered as one of the lowest in the world in India. That also leads to some amount of degradation in land because of Ozar lands and so on in the command areas. Most command areas have only irrigated about 40% of their total area. So that's one set of problems. The other set of problems is about the practices followed by the farmers in cultivating crops. So that starts from seeds itself, the varieties of seeds, the fertilizer application, the pesticide application, irrigation practices, and so on. So we do see that there is a considerable difference between what farmers actually practice and what is considered as a best practice. And I'll give some data on that. And because of that, we see considerable yield gap. And on average, the Indian agriculture is able to get about 68% of the potential yield. So there is a yield gap exists, and considerable yield gap exists, particularly in some of the crops, and which also affects the competitiveness of Indian agriculture. Our policies are cereal centric, a lot more emphasis on cereal production because of the historical food security reason. And therefore, that also leads to a certain amount of land degradation because of monocropping and so on. The other issue with the agriculture is the quality of the supply chain, where the agriculture supply chain is having too many intermediaries, a lot of cost, not handled properly. The warehousing, transportation is not as per the quality standards, and therefore there is a considerable loss in the supply chain, as well as quality is a major issue in the agriculture supply chain. We also see that lack of collective action, though Indian farmers are having small size of holding, almost about 86% of the farmers are small or marginal landholders, but somehow the coming together and sort of address some of these issues are not taking place. Here and there, we do see some cooperatives working or some farmer producer organization, but on a large scale, we don't see the collective action happening, which has a potential for addressing many of these problems, whether it's a resource use problem, practice problem, supply chain problem, and so on, can be addressed if there is an effective collective action. I think one good example of this is the Amul example, which has been able to do well in terms of both productivity as well as streamlining the supply chain. And similar collective action could actually help in many Indian farmers. We do see that wherever those organizations, especially farmer producer organizations and cooperatives work, they have been able to address many of the current problems. So the problem seemed to be that one major problem seemed to be collective action. This we did a experiment, RCT a few years ago, taking about 300 farmers as control and 300 as treatment farmers. And our aim was to see how information, provisioning information, helps in improving the practices and therefore the yield. So here we see, if you look at the baseline, application of nutrients, for example, you can see that, the gray bars are the recommended quantities, whereas the applied quantities are the blue and the brown bars. And we see that the upper panel is actually for paddy, the lower panel is for cotton. These were the two major crops on which we actually focused our attention on. And we find that in almost all cases, for all the nutrients like nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, in both these crops, the application of nutrients was much higher than recommended. So which essentially means that the marginal productivity of these nutrients would be lower, and therefore the cost of production will be higher, and also the revenue as well. So the net returns are going to be less. And when we did this experiment for about 2 years, so we have a midline after 1 year and then end line after 2 years. When we did this, so what we find is, in case of paddy crop, we were able to increase the yield by about 5 quintals, which is about 20% of the yield increase. We were able to reduce the cost by about 5,715 rupees, which is about 26% of the cost. And the revenue went up by 9,263, which is about 26% of the revenue. And the returns increased by 14,901, which is basically about 93% increase. So similarly, this is in case of paddy. In case of cotton also, we were able to get similar results. Even in the case of cotton, even first year and soon after first year, we were able to see the yield increases, and by second year, there were substantial increase in the yield and therefore the revenue, and there also the net returns actually increased substantially. So when we looked at the cost expenses on the fertilizers and insecticide, in both cases actually decreased, for both paddy crop as well as for the cotton crop. So we could see we were able to reduce the cost of production and we were able to increase the yield. And therefore, we could actually make agriculture remunerative through proper information and knowledge sharing. So which actually, indicates that if our quality of service delivery is good, then we can actually make it remunerative, agriculture remunerative, sustainable. And the other, of course, alternative, of course, it could be, in addition to good quality of service delivery, if there are collective efforts, then, again, we can see that, proper information can be shared, technology can be adopted, which basically points to, deficiency in social capital. We, of course, would have been benefited if the farmers are having, adequate skills, knowledge, which points out to the human capital development. So which essentially means that, we need to focus on education and health sector. And if you are able to do well in this, and over a period of time, we would see that, there would be a better social capital, better human capital, and, agriculture as well as other sectors will actually develop, with a much higher growth rate. So if you look at education and health indicators from the NFHA most recent NFHA survey, we see substantial differences between rural and urban areas. And in some cases, the problems are not going away. I'll just highlight some of them. This is looking at the children between the age of 6 to 59 months, okay, who are anemic. So you can see that large percentage, about 60% of the children were anemic in 2016, and that reduced marginally to 56%. So the large problem actually, the problem still remains very large and seem to continue, at the same rate. Of course, in the case of urban area, the anemic percentage is much greater. And that's probably because the rural people end up growing certain crops and therefore able to consume on farm. So if you look at women anemic, which has implications in terms of childbearing and health of the children, we again see significant percentage, like 54.3% in 2016, which reduced to only about 50.8%. So still large proportion of women are still anemic in rural area. Again, urban area is still worse in this respect. So there is also an indicators regarding whether people are taking adequate diet. This is with respect to children between the age of 6 and 23 months. And again, we see only very small percentage are receiving the adequate diet. That's a concern for us. Then again, if you look at other indicators like percentage of children under 5 who are underweight, again, we see it has reduced from 38.3% in 2016 to 29%, but 29% is still quite high. So these are problems that seem to persist for a longer period. And with the effect, we see that percentage of children under 5 years who are wasted is considerably high, like 21.5% to now about 20%. And we will also see similar pattern in the case of stunted, which is, of course, larger percentage from 41.2% to 31%. So, infant mortality is very high in rural area. It's about 41% now, which is a concern. And of course, in compared to urban area, it's much larger and probably needs a lot more attention there. Some of these problems arise because of course, food, drinking water, sanitation services, and so on. And we see that, if you look at the percentage of people using safely managed drinking water, so we see it as is still under 60%, and the sanitation services, it's around 50%. So it's improving, but still a large percentage of the people are still not receiving proper drinking water and sanitation services. So because of these, the Global Nutrition Report 2016, so ranked India 120th out of 130 countries on wasting, 170th countries among 185 countries on prevalence of anemia, and 114th out of 132 countries under 5 stunted. So these are major issues. Apart from that, one can also look at literacy. Percentage of women 10 year or having 10 year or more years of schooling is still low. like 2020-21, it's about 51%. Then if you look at the schooling in rural area, we do see that there is an increased enrollment in the private schools, these blue bars. And you can see that, by 2016 or 2018, it's about 35% or so. And whereas the government, the enrollment in government school is about 65%. So most of the children, we also looked at some data from Karnataka. Most children who go to government schools are poor students coming from socially backward background, or income-wise they are poor. So therefore, I think it's important that we pay attention to government schools and try to see what can be done to improve the education in government schools, so which would help in building better skills and human capital among the lower income groups, so which might in the long run help in addressing inequality. So this is again government and private schools, and which gives an indication of their income levels, their ability to have let's say smartphones, or having a separate phone by themselves. So which essentially says that those who are going to government schools are relatively from the poorer sections. So if we look at the performance of the schools over a period of time, from the ASAR report, we do find that the government schools perform more poorly compared to the private schools. And over a period of time, at least till 2016, 2014, this was actually, the condition was sort of deteriorating. And more recently, we see some improvement in 2016, 2018. Of course, the COVID has again created more problems, and it has also created problems for the poor children, because they cannot afford smartphones or access to internet and so on, and therefore they suffer a lot more. So we see both in the case of ability to read and and recognize numbers, the government schools actually do poorly. So poor students going to government schools and the government schools doing poorly is a reason for contributing to this growth in inequality. So because of that, we do see that human capital index of 2021 indicates that India is ranked 116 out of 174 countries, where India scores about 0.49 compared to the top ranked country, Singapore, 0.88. So we looked at this issue and tried to see whether we can help government schools improve their education delivery. So we, as a part of the Unnat Bharat Abhiyan program of Government of India, the higher education institutions are expected to adopt villages and work in various sectors, and helping them to develop these sectors. So we have adopted 5 Gram Panchayats in Tumkur district, and we are working on agriculture, health, education, drinking water, and employment. And as a part of education activities, we have been working with this particular school in a place called Nonuvinikere in Tiptur Taluk of Tumkur district. since the last year or so. And we are trying to see what best can be done there. It's a reasonably large size school. In fact, it has been identified as a public school by the government, which essentially means that this will be provided with additional budget in order to improve facilities in the school. Of course, we can observe that again, the students coming here are mostly from the socially backward category. And also we see that the girl students are in larger number compared to the boys, partly because some families are willing to send their children to, let's say, private schools outside the town or village, and mostly the boys will go and the girls attend the local schools. So therefore, this is a nice case for us to intervene and try to see what can be done. There is both English medium and Kannada medium in this particular school. And the 10th standard result has been reasonably good for English medium, but not so much for the Kannada medium. In fact, the result is sort of coming down over time, except for 2021-22, where because of the COVID, sort of every student pass the exam. So in our activities, so we have started 3 initiatives. One is smart class classroom, and second one is the nutrition garden, and third one is computer training. Smart class is basically having projector and computer and a screen. And we also link to internet, so that anyone from long distances can also teach. In fact, we connected to a studio. We had worked earlier on 1,000 schools, and we had partnered with a private education delivery company, and they have helped us in actually setting it up. And they also conducted a number of classes from their studio, and train the teachers how to deal with this technology and use it. And we have provided the content from an NGO who had developed this for various grades. So this is, has been helpful for the local teachers also. They have been using it. And apart from the content that we have provided, it also helps in sort of, do an assessment of the student learning capability with the RAFT technology, where we have provided the clickers to the students. So there is also a two-way interaction is possible with this technology. So local teachers also use this technology to deliver their classes, and some of the topics are handled by the private company, which is actually delivering through the studio. We also initiated early morning classes when there was a lockdown, so that students could use their parents' cell phone or so and access the lessons. So this was basically for only 2 months to help the 10th standard students to review their lessons and be prepared for the exam. We are yet to sort of assess the impact of that. The other initiatives that we have done is the nutrition garden. Essentially, when we were, observing their, activities, one of the things that we found was the midday meal that is served in the school had very little vegetables. So we thought having a nutrition garden can help, both in terms of improving the nutrition content of the midday meals, as well as it can be an experiential learning tool. In fact, many of the topics in mathematics or science and so on can be effectively handled using examples of the nutrition garden. And it could also be a life skill development opportunity. So we collaborated with the Indian Institute of Horticulture Research for technical guidance. Of course, we contacted the horticulture department of the government. They initially promised, but never delivered anything. Worked with the local Gram Panchayat for facilities like water, and we identified about 6,000 square feet area in the school premises, and started the school garden in middle of January 2022. So we planted a combination of 12 vegetables as suggested by Indian Institute of Horticulture Research, and we started getting vegetables by mid-March 2022. So here are some pictures of the nutrition garden and also the vegetables. So we formed a student club for participating in the various activities of the nutrition garden. Some students actually participate very actively, sort of looking after the garden every day for a few minutes and so on. Teachers were also invited to participate, and one of them actually helped us. We also invited the school development and monitoring committee members to observe and manage. Of course, IIMB staff visited regularly, sent pictures and managed the garden, and contacted IHR scientists whenever there is a need. So by the end of March, substantial quantity of vegetables were produced, and we informed the school that vegetables to be used in addition to what they actually use. So harvested vegetables daily and paid and supplied to the school kitchen. And for 3 days, we recorded the ingredients used by the school in the midday meals, as well as the vegetables that we have provided to the midday meal. So we did a small impact analysis. For this, we used PM portion and ICMR and NIN guidelines, which has a recommendation on the dietary norms. PM portion also gives, what should be the ingredient in a midday meal in the schools. So we compared the actual category of ingredient per students with the recommended norms, and nutrient content was also assessed. So here are some results of that. These are the 3 days on which we have observed, 29th, 31st of March and 1st of April. The meal provided is rice and sambar, pulao and rice and sambar. Number of students were 200, 200 and 150, because the 10th standard students were not attending at that time. And of course, there were also the staff members, using the midday meal, consuming the midday meals. There was also a milk provided in the school as a part of what is known as a Kshira Bhagya scheme of government of Karnataka, which I think probably it's there only in Karnataka. Though the genesis of providing the milk in the school sort of started with Karnataka government giving subsidies to the farmers, dairy farmers on the basis of milk produced, and suddenly they realized that a whole lot of milk is coming to the cooperatives, and part of it was actually used as of course a milk powder, and then supplied it to the schools. So this is what PM Poshan prescribed quantities are for grains: 150 grams pulses, 30 grams vegetables, 75 grams oil and fats, 7.5 grams. And we also compare that with the actual quantities, and then we the percentage of the stipulated quantity provided in the midday meal compared to the taking into account the number of students. So we find that about 80% of the requirement of food grains were met on the first day, and about 65% in the next 2 days. Pulses, only 1 day pulses was given. The next 2 days there were no pulses given by the school for midday meal. As far as vegetable is concerned, again, we see that 1 day there was vegetable is given, whereas from the vegetable garden, we were providing about 10 kilos, on an average every day. So with this, we could see that without the nutrition garden, as far as vegetable is concerned, only 26% of the stipulated amount was provided, whereas with the nutrition garden, about another 60% we added, in terms of stipulated quantities. So oil and fat, in fact, they were providing a lot more oil and fat compared to what is stipulated in the PM Poshan. So when we looked at the cost of the ingredient they have used and what is stipulated, they were actually using only a small percentage of the received money for vegetables and spices and spending that money to buy ingredients, which essentially means that they could have purchased a lot more vegetables in order to meet the stipulated quantities. Then we compared this with the actual, the recommended dietary allowance, and compared it with how much what the actual intake is. We find that on a number of except for protein and carbohydrate and sodium, in the rest of the cases, the amount provided in the midday meals is much less than the stipulated amount. And we also looked at the contribution of vegetable garden in the midday meals. And we find that, in some of these, nutrients, for example, whether it's calcium, iron, magnesium, phosphorus, potassium, and vitamin C, and vitamin, this is folate. Some of these ingredients were contributed significantly by the vegetable garden, so beta carotene and so on. Of course, milk also provides substantial amount of nutrients. So therefore, considering the current deficiency of the nutrients in the midday meal, one can also probably create a nutrition garden that can address the nutritional deficiency by combining those vegetables which have higher amount of those nutrients which are deficient in the current meal. So one can also come up with a crop calendar to develop a nutrition garden, and probably to help all other schools, one can probably develop an app or some web models which would help schools to plan for the vegetable garden. So what we find here is that no attention towards the PM Poshan guidelines and what ingredient are to be used is paid while cooking the midday meal. So no concern for nutrient levels in the midday meals. So that's why we see that like something like anemia, which is possibly because of the lack of iron content in the meals that the students are taking. So cooks were reluctant to use some of the vegetables like okra. And we find that the HM and the SDMC members were happy with the nutrition garden, and they appreciated the meal with the vegetables, but they have not actively participated. So in fact, when we asked the HM to provide water for vegetable garden, somehow she was very reluctant to do that. So we had to organize some other sources in order to irrigate the vegetable garden. So therefore, we find that it's likely to require hand-holding for longer time, basically try to involve as many people as possible, both students and teachers. So convincing this would probably take longer time. So what we plan to do is to develop teaching material as well based on nutrition garden. Maybe it's topics in mathematics or science and so on, and also identify a number of project-based learning and give it to the teachers so that they can use it in their classes. So maybe we'll also create some competition among students group involving nutrition garden so that they can be motivated to participate more in the nutrition garden. And in the process, also bring awareness about the nutrients and how to address them. The other initiative that we have taken up is a computer lab in that school and training. There were 20 computers in the school, which were stolen 2 years ago. So there were no computers. And then we requested companies to help us. And the company Consero Global helped us with 10 laptops. These are second-hand laptops, but they are in very good condition. So we got the required software loaded from our partner private company, Gumbi Technology. So we arranged computer classes for 2 weeks. It just got over just 2 days back. And 31 students, completed the program, and they were quite interested and attended all the classes, though it was a vacation period for them. So we see that there was no serious action from the department, schools, or SDMC regarding stolen computers. Not very much bothered about it. In the computer classes, only theory was dealt, no experience in using computers. Eagerness to get computer labs started was missing among the teachers when we told them also. We didn't see that eagerness to have a good computer lab. Students were eager to work on computers and participated in the program through. So from these experiences and observation, some of the conclusions that I thought we could draw is Nutrition awareness needs to be created among all stakeholders, particularly in the schools, among teachers and students and the SDMC members and so on. Importance of education is yet to be internalized by the government departments and community. When we went to, let's say, the Gram Panchayat and so on, we had to follow it up several times in order to get, let's say, water supply and so on. And in fact, even now, the toilet and other things are in bad conditions, but we have been, requesting them to please take care of it. But their response is very slow. So somehow, there is a feeling that education is not so important for them to address. So that's a big problem. I think that's somehow needs to be corrected. So several broken systems need to be streamlined in order to fix any activities. Just to take an example of the nutrition garden itself. So the water, we wanted water, and there were bore wells of the Gram Panchayat nearby, but to get the water from there, it took a considerable amount of time, almost about a month or more, and several rounds of following up. They would have these bore wells, but not operating. There will be, there are pump sets somewhere in some other bore well. They have to be taken from there and fix it here. So there are these dysfunctional systems that exist, and which, unless one takes care of it, it becomes difficult to streamline any activity. We, of course, observe that whether it's a health or education and so on, there is no benchmark for service delivery in the government department. They can supply textbooks, maybe in the middle of the year or and so on. The timetable sometimes, goes very late, and so things like that. So there is no, benchmarks established to carry on the activities. We also see that community participation in service delivery is poor. So it's a government school, so government should provide rather than community, members coming and participating in some of these activities. So while, when something is delivered, they would appreciate it, but somehow we find that their active participation is actually lacking. So therefore, there is a need for a catalyst to bring changes in all these. And the transformation is likely to take considerably long time, with good amount of effort by, number of agencies. So I'll stop it here, and if there are any questions, I'll be happy to take.
Thank you, Gopal. You've covered a range of issues, starting with inequality, then moving to agriculture, education, nutrition, a whole range. I'll pick up. I have a question of my own, which I'll start with, and then there's a question in the box. I'll get back to you on that. The first issue is, you had indicated as you were speaking that cooperatives and FPOs are doing well in patchy areas. So the question is, in terms of when we look at it from the perspective of inequality, do you think the state should promote more and more of collectives rather than private sector enterprises? Given that capital-centric organizations accumulate profit, or alternatively, is it okay to leave the markets and promote the markets and do large-scale redistribution like DBTs, PM Kisan, and things like that? What do you think would be, since you're also an economist, what do you think would be a better strategy? I know it's not a binary question, but I'm still pushing you to sort of answer this.
I strongly feel that collective action is very, very important. While private sector can be there, and I can take an example of Totogar Seal Society in Sirsi, which is doing quite well in terms of serving the members, and they effectively compete with the private sector. And so therefore, because of them, the members are able to address many of their problems, whether it is in terms of input quality, whether it is in terms of sales of their produce, whether it is in terms of transportation of their goods. So of course they now they have been able to address even other issues of livelihood, like health and education and so on. So therefore, I think collective action, where we see number of cooperatives here and there who have done extremely well in terms of providing not only the services, with respect to agriculture, but also, they have looked at other livelihood issues of, let's say, farmers, and try to address those issues. So I think, encouraging collective action is very important. It can actually help in streamlining markets. Otherwise, if in the absence of a good regulator, the private sector could drive markets, especially in agriculture or wherever there are large number of smallholders are there, small producers are there. In the private sector can also drive the market in some way or the other, not benefiting the farmers. So collective action is, I feel, it should be a focus of the government policy. And of course, they can also encourage private sector. They should, and there can be a competition between the cooperatives and the private sector.
Thanks, Gopal. There's one question that's related to your experiment. What was the treatment condition on the paddy and cotton experiments that you showed? Would you like to take that?
Yeah, treatment. Sorry, say that again.
What is the treatment condition on the paddy and cotton experiments that you showed?
Treatment condition in the sense, so after 2 years of treatment conditions, essentially we had number of research staff who met these treatment farmers on a fortnightly basis, looked at their practices, advised them what is the best practice in terms of whether it is a sowing, whether it's a fertilizer application, whether it's a pesticide application and so on, or irrigation and so on. So they were more of a hand-holding them throughout the 2 years. The first year, of course, they still, they were sort of, outsiders, and it took some time for them to believe in the advice given by our staff. But second year onwards, it was, it went off very well, and a lot of the best practices were adopted by the, treatment farmers.
So another question, Gopal, when we are looking at inequality in rural areas, and since you do a lot of work in the villages, when you are looking at these communities for whom you have provided nutrition gardens, educational facilities and things like that, are they only largely economically backward, or is there a caste angle also to the backwardness or to the inequality? And are these two closely linked, or these are sort of running parallelly and in different lines?
See, what we have observed is, those students who are coming to government schools. We had set up this nutrition garden in the government school. So those who are coming to government schools are either poor or belonging to backward, socially backward communities. So in general, we see that, those who cannot afford private schools would come to government school. And in Karnataka, there is this little bit of a craze for, English medium schools, which are mainly provided by the private schools. So there is a tendency to go to private school if one can afford it. So therefore, most students who come to government schools are from lower income brackets.
One last, yeah, please.
No, did I answer your question? I think.
Sort of, yeah. One last question I have, Gopal. Is the Gini coefficients or the inequality factors higher in rural areas compared to urban areas, or the other way around? And is there a policy intervention that one could do beyond DBTs and MGNREGs? Is there anything else structurally that one could do to address the inequality issues? I mean, Piketty and Chancellor and others just have a large wealth tax, higher level of taxation sort of a solution, which is basically a redistribution-based solution. But is there something that we can do to prevent inequality rather than then do redistribution and correct inequality?
What I think is, we need to, focus on the human capital and social capital. So that's where schools play an important role. So we need to focus a lot more on education. We need to focus a lot more on the school activities and develop these children as people who are skilled, able to work with technology, able to create newer things, and very able to have startups and so on, so that they will come out of this lower level of income, and therefore there will be better income distribution between rural and urban areas, and even within the rural area. Of course, some of the Gini coefficient that I have seen is much lower in case of in urban area, in the rural area compared to the urban area. Of course, not seen the more recent one, but it's an older this one. But in terms of solution, taxing, taxing is good, but the problem is, we don't have an effective mechanism for redistribution, though there is DBT is there and so on, which is again, might help in short run and to some extent, but it's not going to change in unequal distribution. Unequal distribution you can address only through better building capability among human beings. Okay, so that their productivity goes up, they become more creative, they are able to take advantage of technology and so on, and therefore they are able to earn better. So that is possible only when we start with primary, secondary education. If we are able to provide good education, I'm sure that's going to address a whole lot in terms of bringing down this inequality.
Thank you very much, Gopal. I don't think we have any other questions, so we will end the session here. Thank you very much for this very insightful talk, and I'm sure the viewers have and the students have benefited a great deal from this. Thank you for joining in. We will announce the next talk in this series in due course. We have not scheduled one yet, but we'll schedule one very quickly. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you.
Thanks, Shriram.